Yo, this is MegaManFan, and you need to rock and or roll on over to Mr. MegaManFan's YouTube channel, because it's all that rush to make it happen. Peace!
Hello, Megamaniacs. This is Mr. MegaManFan. Welcome back to what is usually the Retro Hunting Adventures, although this week's episode is a little bit different because I'm a little bit under the weather and I'm not going to go out and hunt for anything today. So instead, I'm going to play Mega Man for Game Gear on my analog Mega SG and just rap with you all for a little bit about various things. First, I think I'm going to talk about the TurboGrafx Mini that is coming due very soon and whether or not I'm going to cancel my pre-order on it, because at first when I placed my order for the TurboGrafx Mini when Konami announced it last year, I was really excited about it because it was a great way to bring home a lot of classic TurboGrafx/PC Engine games. But ever since I got my Super SD System 3 for my TurboGrafx-16 and turned it into a super powered machine that can play Super CD games as well as PC Engine games, I'm starting to question the necessity of owning the Mini, because the games that are from Japan are not localized to English, so they would be no different from me playing them on my Super SD System 3. There's no value added there that they're localized for the West for the very first time. The Rondo of Blood that's going to be on the Mini is the same as the Rondo of Blood I can play now, so what even is the point there? And I hate to say I'm being a little bit of a cheapskate too, but when you've made an investment in something like the Super SD System 3 that costs a few $100, spending another $100 on a retro Mini, it starts to feel a little excessive, especially since a lot of these mini consoles, if they don't immediately sell at like large volumes at their full retail price, the MSRP, they get heavily discounted. The PlayStation Classic, that went down to $30. The C64 Mini, that went down to $30, and I picked up both of those at those price points, and some people got them for even lower than that. So as far as I'm concerned, if I was to back off on my TurboGrafx Mini and wait a little while and see if the price drops, I could still get one, but instead of paying a high dollar amount, I could get it at a significant discount compared to the opening price for pre-ordering it. So I feel like between that and the Super SD System 3 I already have that can play the exact same games and quite possibly even play them better because it's playing them on an authentic PC Engine / TurboGrafx chipset as opposed to playing them through whatever form of emulation that the Mini is going to use. I'm pretty sure it's not going to be an FPGA system at the price point they're selling it for, so it's got to be some kind of emulation. And even though that's been done pretty well on systems like the Genesis Mini with M2 being behind it, it's not perfect, and some people have complained about the quality. So if it's not perfect on the TurboGrafx Mini, then what I have may just be better than what I could get. So why even do it at that point? But that's just my thoughts. This retro hunting adventure is all about my thoughts today, so let me know what you think in the comments below, or hit me up on Twitter at Mr. MegaManFan, MrMegamanFan, and I'll respond. Speaking of my thoughts as I play this on my analog Mega SG is that I'm getting a little bit of flicker on the top line of these Game Gear games. Not exactly sure why, but it's preferable to when I had a cartridge conversion of the Game Gear game for Master System, because it was displaying the full data on the screen instead of cropping it like this does. So you'd get a lot of garbage data on the screen that was actually counterproductive to playing, because it would look like you were jumping to something solid that wasn't solid, or you'd look like you were climbing a ladder, only there wasn't really a ladder there because it was just overflow garbage data that was being displayed on the screen. So while this is better, I feel like the flicker is slightly annoying, and I also feel like the scaling is making everything look really gigantic here. I would actually prefer to shrink it down slightly smaller so it's not so blown up compared to playing it on the actual Game Gear. And I do have this game for the Game Gear, and I have the instruction manual for it, but I don't have a box. And usually you don't see boxes alone sold for the Mega Man Game Gear. And if you do, they're usually in pretty terrible shape. They've been left sealed and they've crushed because of that. They've just warped inward over time because nobody took the shrink wrap off. Or they've just been found in somebody's basement under a pile of stuff and it's just been mushed down over the years. So you don't see a lot of good condition ones, and the good condition ones you do see are usually complete in-box copies that sell for ridiculous amounts. And since I already have the game in the manual, I'm not really prepared to do that. So I've mulled over the idea of buying a reproduction box just for shelf display, because it's one of the few Mega Man games that I don't have a box for. I don't know how you would all feel about that, if you think that's inauthentic, but spending anywhere from $500 to $1,000 to get 2/3 of stuff that I don't need and 1/3 of stuff that I do just seems incredibly backwards. And if I could buy a reproduction box that was clearly marked as a reproduction on, a little white print on it somewhere that says reproduction copy, I'd be fine with that, because it's just for shelf display. It's not like I would be selling it to anybody or trying to fool anybody with it. And in fact, if I ever got into a financial bind and had to sell the game and the manual, I would take the box and separate it and just sell the game and manual. I wouldn't even sell the box. The box would literally be for display purposes only. So it would be slightly less real because of that, but it would still be the real game and manual, and everything else on my shelf would be complete in box. So at least it would match up with everything else. At least it would look like it fit a little better. Let me see now if there's any way I can change these settings to make the Game Gear not scale to the full size of my smart TV. Let me see. 4x, 4.55. I don't know if that really helps, but let's see if this made any difference. Go back to Mega Man. Oh no, these pixels still look blown up to the full size of the screen. It's probably a little bit the fault of the Game Gear having such a small screen resolution that the core that's designed for this is trying to overcompensate. And the settings in the system menu may only be for Genesis games. They may not apply to the cores, because the cores are something that was done by jailbreaking it, courtesy of Smoke Monster's Jailbreak. So I'm not sure there's any way to get around this. Now, if any of you are more clever or smarter than me, which, hey, maybe that's most of you listening to me right now, then leave a comment below and tell me how I can reduce the screen resolution of Game Gear games on the Game Gear core for Analog Mega SG so that it's not blown up to the entire size of the screen, because I don't want the overdraw, but I also don't want the pixels to be so huge that it feels like chunky is the only word I can think of. Because Sega Master System games look natural. Genesis games, they look great. But the pixels are so blown up on the Game Gear games that it just feels like you're looking at it through a magnifying glass. It feels unnatural at that point. If I could just shrink it down a little bit and still maintain the size and shape without like distorting it. You know, I don't want uneven pixels or anything that's interpolated that just shifts around and shimmers and looks nasty. I just want to make it smaller. I just don't want it to be zoomed in to fill the entire screen. And I don't think the advanced settings here are going to help me with that in any way. Because again, I feel like all of this stuff just applies to the Genesis base analog Mega SG settings. The settings for playing Genesis games or playing Genesis ROMs off an SD card. Speaking of which, as long as I'm just randomly giving my thoughts on the retro hunting adventures today, I bought a 64 gigabyte micro SD thinking I would transfer everything on my card from a 4 to a 64 so I'd have more room to work with. And when I put it back in the SD slot, it said, cannot mount SD card. Is 64 gigs too big for the Analog Mega? I didn't think it was. That kind of threw me for a loop. Or maybe it's a brand issue that the brand I bought is just incompatible. But it didn't seem like it was because both cards read on my MacBook just fine and both appear to be formatted the exact same way. And I just don't know what the difference is that it doesn't like a 64 gig micro SD card. And I guess the only thing I could do is buy a different brand and see if that one works any better, because I can't tell the difference from one to the other, why one would mount and the other wouldn't, because I put the 4 gigabyte micro SD back into my SD card converter and put it back in the SD card slot. It works. So, God help me, I don't know what I did wrong, but I also don't know how to fix these settings for Game Gear. I think I'm just stuck with it being overscanned as hell. But let's just experiment and try a few different games. Yeah, the 5-in-1. Oh, geez, look at how big that text is. That's kind of what I'm talking about. Look at how small the menu text is compared to the text on the screen. That just tells you how blown up everything is. I just don't see a way to do it. But if somebody else knows, I'm willing to listen. See, Genesis games, Mega Drive games, they look just fine at this full screen resolution with just black borders on either side. That's fine. That's how I like it. And if Game Gear games weren't such small resolution to begin with, I'd probably be fine with that as well. Let's try Addams Family, see how that looks. I don't think I've ever played this one before on my Mega SG. I suppose if there's not a version of this game for Nintendo, I could play it for an episode of Genesis Does, because as long as it's what Nintendo don't, it qualifies. But I feel like this might be a conversion of a game that was on multiple consoles, because I know there are Addams Family games on the Nintendo. I know Pugsley's Scavenger Hunt was one of them. But I don't remember playing one particularly like this, where Gomez runs around collecting things. And there's a really weird lag time from when you hit pause and look at your items to when you actually go back to the gameplay. And even more so than with Mega Man, there's a lot of flicker on the top. And I don't know if that's because it's a PAL game, or it's because it's trying to make the resolution too big, or if it's because there are too many sprites on the screen at one time. See, it doesn't seem to flicker when you're in the inventory. And it doesn't seem to be flickering now, or at least I can't tell because it's against a black starry background. Now it's starting to flicker again now that there's more stuff being drawn on the screen. Maybe it's just the way it's programmed, although it could definitely be because it's a PAL game running on an NTSC console, because I don't think there was an Addams Family Sega Master System game. I mean, there is, but there wasn't here. So that's what I'm trying to say. It would have been a European or Australian region exclusive game. As far as I know, there are 114, I think that's the right number, 114 physical Sega Master System games that were made in North America. I don't have every single one complete with box instructions cartridge, but I've got most of them complete and a few that are just cartridge and box, but none loose. That wasn't always the case. I had Buster Douglas Boxing loose for a long time, and one of the last things that I picked up before YouTube was even around was a complete copy of Buster Douglas Boxing. That was one of the last ones I didn't have a box for. I'm Mr. MegaManFan. Thanks for watching.